Welcome everyone to this session of the Demand Gen Summit. I am joined by Lindsay Chepkema. How are you doing today, Lindsay?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here. Thank you,
Yeah,
Jenny.
we're excited to have you. For those of you who don't know Lindsay, she has dedicated her career to the world of marketing. She is truly an expert when it comes to podcasts and just creating a brand. She was the former CEO and co-founder of Casted and has spent the last 20 years championing, wow, I can't say that word, authentic brand building that prioritizes human connection. Before we get started, I would love to just hear a little bit about yourself, Lindsay, and Human Brands Wins.
Yeah. So thank you for that. As you mentioned, I've spent, 20 years in B2B marketing, always on the brand and content side of things. So working alongside some really incredible demand gen leaders and marketers. And I am excited now, as you mentioned, I was founder and CEO at a company called Casted, did that for 5 years, and now I'm doing some consulting and some advising and working with brands like those that are engaging in this summit today, to say, okay, your story matters, your content matters, how you are telling your story, what you're sharing, why you're sharing it, who you're sharing it with is really, really important if you want and need to drive those super, super important performance metrics that everybody is being held to at an even higher bar now than it seems like before. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, here at the Demand Gen Summit, we're sharing a lot of strategies around how people can generate that demand and really start driving it. And I know one big initiative that you support is around content strategy. What would you say are like the key components to having that successful content marketing strategy?
Yeah. Well, one thing that's interesting is that most companies still do not have a documented content strategy, right? And if you don't, you are in the majority. It's not something to be ashamed of, but it is something that is really, really helpful if you do have an intentional strategy for what you're saying, who it's for, why you're doing it. That's really, really, really important, because otherwise you get into this place where you're being reactionary. You're getting asked, this is when you get asked by your sales team and asked by your CX team and asked by your leadership team constantly, do we have anything about this? Can we create something on? Can we do a campaign about? And when you have a clear intentional strategy to speak to those teams, to speak to those leaders, proactively, to understand what their needs are for the coming months and the coming quarters, and then get really creative and proactive around how you can serve those teams and helping them really engage with and serve your collective audience. That's where not only the fun happens, but the efficiency in the effectiveness can really come to fruition. So content strategy is nothing new. We've been talking about it for decades. But I think especially now where marketers are under so much more pressure than normal, which has always been a lot of pressure, to deliver results, to deliver ROI, to deliver pipeline, having a clear, documented, intentional, proactive content strategy just helps make everything run so much more smoothly.
Yeah, I really like how you frame it around make sure you understand everyone's initiative. I think sometimes we get caught up in demand gen just being a marketing, it's marketing owned, it's a marketing thing. But that makes it sound so across your organization, how you should be looping in everyone and using them to create those plans.
Yeah. Something that I say all the time is, who's it for and why are you doing it? Which absolutely, typically I say that in response to like, oh, how do you start a podcast? How do you start a video strategy? Well, first think about who your audience is and what you're trying to accomplish. But that's absolutely true about overall marketing strategy, overall content strategy as well. When you're talking about who is this marketing for? Why are we doing this marketing? And that quite often the answer has to be and should be and is often overlooked is your internal audience, your sales team, your CX team, your leadership team, your investors, to help them really work together with marketing and your messaging to be able to achieve the business's overall goals. Like you said, it's not just marketing. The whole goal is not to just generate the initial marketing metrics. It's to drive overall growth and health for the business.
Yeah. The other thing that really stood out to me is how you described it as fun. And I think as we're trying to balance like the overwhelming feeling of like the bar is being set higher and we're coming off of 2024, a lot of people's 2020, going into 2024 and like our 2023 initiatives necessarily aren't working. Like, where do you see content marketing fitting into this? Does it still just come back to like the who is it for and why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think something that I have experienced is there's a lot of fear and scarcity right now, right? Just take a breath and look around at your life and your job and your company, and there's a lot of it, right? You don't have to look very far. And when that happens, the first two things to go in your life, in your company, in your job, in any situation, when you're under stress because you're freaked out, is your creativity and your connections with other humans, right? So we tend to, under pressure, go into our own holes, and you don't have time for creativity. You're just trying to survive. You're just trying to generate the MQLs and trying to generate pipeline and just do what has worked in the past. And that's what everybody around you is telling you to do too. That's what your leadership is telling you to do. Everyone is freaked out. No one is excited about taking risks and being creative and trying something new and fun and different. But that's what we as human needs. That's what your audience wants. Your audience isn't trying to like convert so that you can hit your metrics. Your audience wants to be, I mean, we're all humans, we know this. Yeah. Your audience wants to be engaged and entertained and educated, and like we all know that. And what does that? Rich, compelling, engaging, helpful content. That's the role that it plays. It's the what. It's the what that helps carry out the why of the overall business. And then all of the other stuff, the tactics, the performance-based, the demand gen, the campaigns, the paid media, that's the how, right? That's how you get in front of the right people. And quite often that's how you measure, but you've got to have the clear, compelling what. And sometimes, especially now, it takes boldness and some bravery to embrace and stand up for and fight for that creative opportunity.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. It's like what you said before, it's moving away from being reactionary. And I know it can sometimes feel challenging to create that rich, engaging content. One of the ideas that you had shared with me is just making sure you're targeting the right audience. How have you seen leveraging audience research to create that personalized content to help ensure that it's relevant and to ultimately boost that engagement?
Yeah. So one of the things that you and I talked about a little bit before this was the audience research. First of all, it's super important. It's really easy to just figure that, in product development, in marketing, in sales, it's easy to assume that you know who you're talking to, right? But you know what happens when we assume. So audience research is important, and it's not something you do once. It's not a box that's checked. It's ongoing, and it's anecdotal. It is qualitative and quantitative. And it's little bits here and there. I think very few of us, if any of us, have the luxury of saying, we're going to do audience research now. We're going to spend Q4 just understanding our audience. Like that's not a thing. So what we do instead is look at what you have, look at the resources that you have, whether that's, all of us. The beautiful thing is that we all have access to tools, whether you're a team of one with no budget, I guarantee you have Google Analytics, right? All the way on up to the most resourced marketing team on the planet. We all have access to tools and tech that help us to understand at some level who we're reaching and compare that to who we're trying to reach. That's one. Another one is talk to your sales team. Talk to your sales team, talk to your CX team who works with your customers, and see how the people that they work with are engaging or not with your content, right? How is it reaching individuals or not? And then also your internal audience, like understand who in the organization is consuming the content and what they feel about it and how it is or is not resonating or hitting the marks of what the business needs to accomplish. So I think there are a million ways to conduct audience research. I think the big takeaways here is that it's ongoing, it's never done, and there's 100 different ways you can do it. So I think it's constantly being on the lookout for information about who your audience actually is, how that compares to who you want it to be, and little levers that you can pull along the way to get, to make those two things more similar to each other.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think even as we continue to talk, I'd love to even get a little bit granular. I know you really specialize in the world of podcasts, and I would love to kind of hear what maybe common, like what is working for people, what's not. But kind of just to start out, I mean, for companies, I think some companies are like, they try to do the podcast or like, it's too much work. We're not seeing a return on investment. They pull away, or maybe it's someone who's looking to start it. What advice do you have someone who's either like trying to stop or start a podcast just to get a better return on investment?
Yeah. The biggest mistake that I see people make about podcasting is that they do a show or multiple, and they just leave it over here on its own little podcast island, right? So whether it's a video series or a podcast or whatever it may be, they go get the budget, or they find the time, they get the buy-in, they create the asset, and then it's over here on this island, right? Whereas the businesses, the brands, the shows that are really successful, and that's not even just number of downloads or active, engaged watchers or listeners, that's business growth, is when they're thinking about how the show actually fully integrates with the overall content strategy or the marketing strategy, to say, okay, we're going to do this show, we're going to record these conversations, we're going to have our CEO talk about stuff, and yes, we're going to publish that, but then we're going to wring it out. We're going to take that show, we're going to take every single episode, and we're going to repurpose it, we're going to amplify it, we're going to make it the hub of which several spokes on the wheel all come out of it. And we have the episode, but then we also have blog posts and social media posts and, some really fun and content that can be used elsewhere, and keynote speeches and things that can be used for our investors. And then also looking at what content you already have that can be part of that repurposing too. It's not just about how do I promote the show, it's how do I use the show really to drive all of my content engagement, and therefore brand engagement and sales marketing engagement ongoing. So a very long-winded way of saying, I think the biggest mistake that people make is creating a show, putting it on an island, when instead it should be at the very heart of everything that you're doing.
That's really interesting. You kind of touched on it. Like, most people know it as like a content wheel. You have your heart, what you're saying should be a podcast, and you're playing off of that. I can't remember who said it, and I should probably look it up, but I think of it like the Taco Bell. They have the same meat, the same toppings, but they just repackage it in different ways. And that's really what everyone should be doing with their content. And it just allows you to create so much more content and have it be impactful and really resonate with your audience. So I totally hear and agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier about it should be fun and it should be creative, right? It's like going into the kitchen, like Taco Bell, right? Or like going into your kitchen and being like, what ingredients do I have, right? What ingredients do I already have? And what can I make with it? I've got this blog post, and I've got this podcast episode, and I've got this infographic from 5 years ago, and I've got this interview with my CEO. Like, what could I bake with that? And maybe I just need to go out and get a few more ingredients, and I can do something really cool that gets us out of this hamster wheel of like, oh, we have to create this campaign, which means I have to go do all these things and I have to create everything that new. It's like, what do you already got? And what are you already planning to do? And what do you have time and budget and money and energy slated for 3 months from now that you could think about today, so that you know what you're going to create later and how it's going to be used with the things that you already have or that you're working on right now.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but like, what advice do you have for teams that are just getting started and feel overwhelmed by just the amount of stuff there is to do with these content marketing strategies?
Yep. Exactly. That's the right place to start as far as like everybody's feeling overwhelmed. So just take a minute and know that you're not alone. Yeah. Everybody's there. Once you breathe for a minute, take a look at a couple of things. One, again, who is it for? Why are you doing it? That doesn't mean you have to do an extensive audience research or audience analysis. Just if it's just you, take in your notebook or on your Google Doc and literally like make some bullet points about who's my audience, who is this for, what am I trying to achieve? You can take 5 minutes. So who is it for? Why am I doing it? that'll help you center yourself on like, okay, if we're trying to reach all these different audiences and achieve all these different goals, something's got to go. Something needs to be prioritized, right? So identify who it's for and why you're doing it. Then step 2, look at what you've already got. Take a quick, again, this doesn't have to be an extensive content audit. Just take a look at what you already got, and understand what topics are really important for the week, month, quarter, year ahead that you're looking at, and say, okay, we want to talk about like pineapples are the big theme for next month. Got to talk about pineapples, right? What do we already have about pineapples? What blog posts do we already have? Even if it's from 10 years ago, maybe we can do something cool about like predictions about pineapples then and where we are now. Like, take a look at what you already have that's relevant for what you need to be talking about. So who is it for? Why are you doing it? What do I already have? And then you should have a much clearer idea of what you're trying to do, how the resources that you have to do it. And then it should be a relatively small bucket of what you need to create, as opposed to like, I need to go out and, start from scratch every single time.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I really love the pineapple comparison. For some reason, it just like made sense. I think a lot of times, even for like these events, and I'm sure everyone feels this way, you get told by like sales leaders and your CS leaders, and they're like, this is our big initiative. And you're like, okay, I guess I got to pull this out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And it's so easy to get caught up in like the creating of the new before just taking a moment and looking at what you already have and repurposing. Yeah. I imagine that is such a common pitfall for all marketers.
It is. And I think quite often repurposing gets lumped together with, what do I already have that I can use to promote the thing I'm doing, right? So I recorded a new podcast episode. How can I use different things to promote that episode, right? Like, it's that kind of limited way of thinking, as opposed to what we just talked about with pineapples, of like, this is the big initiative. What have I already got? And you know what people love? Like you and I too, people love the then versus now. And like, this is what we thought about, pineapples were going to be 10 years ago. And look at where we are today. This is what we had to say about it. And this is what's come true. Like, that's really interesting content, So look at what you got before you go out and, freak yourself out about all the things you need to create.
Yeah, for some reason, that just made me think about like account-based marketing. I think when we think back to when it first came out, and for a second, I almost felt like it was getting quiet and dying down. And all of a sudden, I feel like it's had this huge resurgence again this year. Mm-hmm. And it feels very much like what you were describing, where that comparison of like, I would really love to see like, what were we saying back then versus now?
It's true. And it's
I love the things to look into, because that just sounds fun.
It is. It's fun. It's fun to work on, and it's fun to consume. So I'm a big fan.
So to kind of wrap up, I would love to kind of just pick your brain of looking ahead. What trends do you anticipate will kind of like shape the future of content marketing, and how can businesses prepare for these changes?
Sure. Well, one thing that we talked about a lot today, and I've been talking about a lot recently, is this marketers have been under pressure for as long as I've been a marketer, for 2 decades, but it feels like even more so now because of just where, especially in SaaS, right?
Yes.
Is that there's this even more pressure and more fear and more scarcity, which is driving any and all strategy to be focused on only that which the powers that be feel is going to be most likely to produce the most possible results, right? It's like efficiency, effectiveness, low costs, high deliverability of results. And I get that. Like, I've been a CEO. I truly understand. But the problem with that is that, 1, it's miserable. Like, nobody likes being in that situation. 2, as we talked about before, it just stomps out creativity and the desire to connect with other humans. And 3 is it cuts out your legs from underneath you as a business, because if you overlook or neglect who it's for, why are we doing it, what are we trying to say, how can we creatively reach the people that we're trying to connect with, none of all of that other stuff that people think that we need to focus on because everybody's freaked out, none of it will work, because then you just have campaigns that are we're all humans. We can see right through it. Campaigns that are created solely to convert, like who wants to be a part of that? So I think that people are starting to get that. It's been happening long enough that people are starting to feel the pain of neglecting some of this creativity and connection and content. And I think that we're starting to see a resurgence of some of that prioritization of creativity, which is nice to see. And I think that we're going to see more shows, more podcasts, more really fun, interesting content that drives some really, really cool results for brands that are willing to take a shot and be bold.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I think you shared so much great advice. I love that it always came back to the who is it for? Why are you doing it? What do I already have? I think you could just kind of like turn that into just a mantra, a daily mantra maybe. I used to have one like walking to school, like I studied, I know it, I can do it. And it's just one of those things that maybe we as marketers can just like hold in our brains and just put into practice. So thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
So before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I think just be bold, be one of the change makers that embraces creativity and prioritizes human connection. And I mean, I've named my company after it, is the most human brands win, right? At the end of the day, regardless of what technology we're all using or what innovations happen, the brands that have always succeeded and always will are the ones that prioritize creativity and connection. The most human brands win.
Yeah, well, amazing. Thank you again, Lindsay, for joining us.
Thanks, Jenny.